Lyndon Johnson, who so dreaded failure and humiliation, had thus seen with his own eyes, in close-up, the probability of failure and humiliation for anyone who took a Senate leadership position. He was under no illusions about those positions. Knowing, this son of Sam Johnson, the cost of illusions, as always he wanted facts, and he asked the Legislative Reference Service of the Library of Congress to list the powers of party floor leaders. When he received the list, it contained exactly one item: priority and recognition by the chair. He then directed George Reedy, as Reedy recalls, to conduct his own search of the records, the precedents, and the memories of old-timers. But priority of recognition was the only thing I could find. Other than that, Reedy concluded, party leaders possessed no authority whatsoever. Senatorial power was held by the same forces, the Southern Caucus, the Conservative Coalition, most of all by the committee chairman, that had held power for so long. And there seemed no realistic possibility that the situation would change. The leadership was weak because the committee chairman wanted it weak, and the chairman had the power to keep it weak. But what alternatives did Lyndon Johnson have? The road to a chairmanship for himself was seniority, and it was a long road, too long. Johnson was correct in this assessment. Had he remained on the two committees, Armed Services and Interstate and Foreign Commerce, on which he was serving in 1950, he would not have become chairman of either committee until 1969. Leadership positions were the only positions in the Senate for which length of tenure was not an inflexible requirement. During the last months of 1950, Johnson's life was filled with the activity of his Preparedness Subcommittee, but increasingly the activity wasn't satisfying him. More and more often now, in the late afternoons, the staff in the front room of 231 would again hear the click as the corridor door to the private office opened and shut, and the creak as the big chair took the weight of the big body, and then, for a long time, the silence. And now, again, when the buzzer finally sounded on Walter Jenkins's desk, often he would open the door to find no lights on, and his chief slouched deep in his chair in the gathering gloom, his face hidden behind his hand. Looking back on this period in his life, Lyndon Johnson would tell Doris Kearns Goodwin that he had felt an increasing restlessness. He simply couldn't stand, Jim Rowe was to recall him saying, to just wait around again as he had done in the House for so many years. Becoming a part of the Democratic floor leadership would be a risk, a gamble, to this man who feared humiliation as well as defeat, a great risk, a great gamble. But he had taken great risks before. He had gotten to the Senate on the greatest gamble of all, running against the unbeatable Coke Stevenson. And the alternative was to wait and keep taking orders. He couldn't bear to do that. Sometime in November or December 1950, as Goodwin was to put it, he told Russell that a leadership position was one of the most urgently desired goals of his life. Russell, of course, could have had the now vacant Democratic leadership, the majority leadership, since the Democrats would have a 2-vote majority in the incoming 82nd Congress, had he wanted it, but he didn't, for the same reasons that had kept him from taking the job in the past. As his aide William Darden puts it, with him the scheduling problem would have been the big problem. Senator Russell was a person who just didn't want to be bothered with details. He didn't want people saying to him, "Please don't vote this afternoon, my wife is sick," etc. And there were political considerations. Russell felt, his aides say, that a majority leader had an obligation to give at least a modicum of support to a president of his own party, and there were a lot of things in the Truman program that he didn't want to have to support. In addition, the attacks from the liberals were louder than ever. When that November, a letter from Alabama's John Sparkman urged him to accept the leadership because you could bring it into a new position of prestige and power, Russell wrote back, "You and I both know that as a general rule the South is blamed for everything which does not meet with the approval of our critics, and to have a Southerner as majority leader would cause criticism of his acts to fall upon the South as a whole." To forestall such criticism, Russell felt, the new leader should not be a Southerner but a friend of the South, someone who would keep the Senate on its present Southern course without rocking the boat. Ernest W. Bob McFarland of Arizona fit that bill. A chubby, ruddy-faced, easygoing man of 56 with a habit of running both hands through his mop of gray hair when he was puzzled, a gesture he made rather frequently. He was shy but genial and friendly and not at all a boat rocker. He was a middle-of-the-roader, except on the issue that mattered most. His record against cloture and civil rights was rock solid. And, perhaps yearning for a few moments in the political sun, as Evans and Novak speculated, McFarland accepted the job, although his Senate term expired in 2 years and he would have to run for re-election then. The choice of McFarland dismayed liberals. "He is an amiable, inoffensive, genuinely likable ex-judge," said columnist Lowell Mellett. "He is my friend and everybody's friend. But he is no leader. During his 10 years in the Senate, he had just gone along, content to be led." The country is crying out for leadership. This is a time of crisis in our country's and the world's history. How well our country meets this crisis will depend greatly on the United States Senate, and that will depend on how well the Senate is led. So it is proposed that it shall not be led at all.